live build with OpenBots today. Hello, Natalie. Are you
Oh,
nervous?
Anders, a little bit, but very excited as well.
That's great. Natalie is a product expert from OpenBots. Natalie, can you maybe introduce yourself quickly?
Oh yeah, Natalie Alvarado. I'm a customer success lead at OpenBots, and today I'll be going over Lifetime on a Studio and focusing on the Microsoft Soft Office.
So today we learn to automate Microsoft with OpenBots. If you out there want to build this, you can easily copy what Natalie does step by step. And OpenBots is free. You can take all the tutorials there you want. You can get certified for free. I'll definitely recommend to go check it out. And if you have any questions during today's session, simply just put them in the chat. I'll promise we answer everyone. Maybe there will be a bit of delay for 1-2 minutes where Natalie codes, but I'll make sure that Natalie will answer everyone's questions. Back to you, Natalie. What will you show us today?
Yeah, so just wanted to give a quick overview of OpenBots. As you know, it's a full-fledged automation suite where we have everything you need to build your bots, to manage them, to deploy them, and to enhance them as well. Today, I'll be focusing mostly on the studio portion. Studio is the IDE where you develop your automations, you test them locally before it goes into production and do the rest of the steps for deployment, right? A studio is for free and it's available on our website. You can download it at any time. It doesn't have any licensing attached to it. So the only thing you need is to have an account in our OpenBot site and you can start automating as soon as you can.
Looking forward to see what you got for us today, Natalie.
Yeah, perfect. So what you're seeing here right now actually is the studio interface. We have a folder, folder directory, and I have a couple of scripts already built in, but which we can go over. But I'll be first building one, just so we go through that step-by-step process, right? Um,
There's
we
a little bit
mhm,
about your microphone now. We had this problem before. You sound a little bit robotic.
okay.
Di-
Is it is it
I
anything I
think
need
it's
to
each time.
fix on
Maybe
my end? Yep.
yeah. Maybe you can try to minimize the studio again. I'm not sure if that. Can you
Does
try
it
to
sound better
talk
there?
now?
Yeah. Yeah.
No, it's not. It's a little bit of robotic voice.
Okay. But is it good to go forward, or do we want to just check the
I think
configurations maybe? Mhm.
yeah, check the configurations, and to you out there, we will fix this in 1 minute. It's a little bit about it's robotic and it's lagging a bit,
Okay. Let me
but it
see.
started only like 1 minute ago.
I'm using my my headphones. Uh, uh, I don't have any speakers, so I don't think if I disconnect, it'll probably won't hear you very clear.
No, maybe you can try to connect to the session again. That I think that will be the best solution to it.
Okay.
And to you out there, we will quickly have Natalie back to the session,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe can you talk now?
Yeah. Hello?
It's
Do you
not
hear me?
robotic now, at least. Yeah, I can hear you.
Hear me better? Okay.
So
I'll try to share my
yeah, I can.
screen again. I see some
Yeah,
messages.
that's great.
Maybe it's a network. So let's try it
Yeah,
again. Uh,
Frames Mool says it's due to network issue. It's great now.
it sounds better.
Yeah, it's great.
Okay, we'll go
So thank
ahead with
you,
that then.
Pramets. Yeah, and maybe
Yeah.
Pramets, if you can elaborate in the chat, we will be happy to hear. Back to you, Natalie.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. So just a quick tour of the UI for those of you who are not familiar with it. We have the prior folder where we structure all of our scripts that we'll be using, or maybe file dependencies that we'll include in the project as well. We can actually create new scripts right here, so we can modularize our processes into a smaller scripts. That's usually the best practices that we have, because then we can reuse them, right? So we can create a new script. Let's call it. So the first one that I'm going to do is going to be like a sales um, form formatting. Let's call it that. Okay.
And just to
Now,
clarify, we can build
mhm.
this ourselves after the session, right?
Yes, yes, you can go into the studio site, you can download a studio, and you'll have everything there outside the box.
That's great.
Um, Now, if we go into the commands tab, this is where most of the action or the magic actually happens. What we call commands is basically an action that you can do when you're developing a studio. Each command, it has its purpose depending on what you want to do in your automation. Right now, you're seeing all the default commands that come with a new project. However, keep in mind that we have over 600 commands and more keep coming every time, which interact with different applications, different APIs, surface automation, browser automation, desktop, and of course the Microsoft, which is the one that we'll be focusing on. Um, and it always it's included as default in your project, so you always see it there. Okay. Now, mhm.
And when you say you have 600, is all of them available just for free in these commands here?
Yes, we don't have any hidden commands. We don't have any hidden charges with the commands either. Everything is available for you. These are the default ones, but you can always go to Package Manager. And Gallery is the site where we host all of the official OpenBots packages. So if you go into Gallery and you see here, let's say I want to do API automation, it's not included in the default packages, but if we check on our gallery, we do have the API command packages here. So you would choose the version. The version has to match your studio version. And you can install it, and then you have all the commands that come with it available.
That's great.
Um, you can also make a command a default package. So every time you create a new project, it will be included as well. If you know you use a package a lot and you don't want to install it every time you create a new project, you can mark it as a default one. Okay,
Cool. Thank you.
perfect. So back to the Microsoft, right? So in the Microsoft interaction, we have a lot of functionality because, as you know, Microsoft, everybody uses it, or a lot of the companies use it, and it's usually linked to those tedious tasks that we don't really want to do. So we can have the bot do them instead. For example, we have the Excel suite. In the Excels, we have different command interaction. Actually, if you hover over the commands, you'll see a quick description of what each command do. Um, and as you can see, the Excel command list alone is pretty extensive. We have sheet manipulation, we have row, read, writing to a row, to a column, to a range. We have pivot table functionality, the option of running your macros, and much more, right? Um, mhm.
That looks great, Natalie. So you just and being coming from another .NET based RPA tool, this seems very intuitive to me. It's just that I can find the commands to the left, I can drag them into the canvas in the middle or in the main
Mhm.
or what we call it here, and
Yeah.
then we have the variables and the arguments down below to the right. It seems very intuitive for those of us who are used to these RPA tools that are .NET based.
Yeah, and that is the idea behind it. It's something easy. If you are installing a studio for the first time, you'll have the commands there right away. It's easy to find them, it's easy to use them, and you'll have that familiar feel if you are someone coming with an RPA background as well. Um, we also have, for example, the Outlook commands in which you can send emails. You can get emails based on a certain filtering criteria. You can move forward and other email actions that you can perform. Now, One thing to keep in mind, all of these commands, they interact with your Microsoft applications installed on your current machine. So for example, if we actually spy one of these commands by double clicking it, you will see that there is no authentication information here needed from you. And that's because it basically is attaching to your Outlook instance that is already on your machine. So first you need to have it installed in there. You have to have it configured to the account that you are getting the emails from in this case. And you just grab to that all that information. And that's the case for all of these Excel, Outlook. We also have PowerPoint interaction and Word interaction. Mhm.
Natalie, I have a great question because I missed those PowerPoint built-in activities from another RPA tool. So does that mean that I can edit my PowerPoints, for example, based on a forms result, or as they come in, I can update a PowerPoint show?
Yes, so with the PowerPoint commands, you can either create a new PowerPoint with information that you gather, from different sources, from a form, from a website. You can also edit your existing PowerPoints. You can add text, images, tables. You can use your templates that you have stored in your PowerPoint and structure them as needed. Basically, every field within your slide has its own ID if you spy them, and you can choose to add information in each of these fields. And other functionality like adding a slides, deleting it, exporting it to PDF, and more. So yeah, I do think PowerPoint may be something sometimes we overlook, but sometimes it does come in handy for your automations as well.
Cool.
Okay, so that's with these commands. They attach to an application. Now we also have what we call the Microsoft 365 commands. So for example, if you have a use case where you don't want the dependency of having, let's say, Outlook installed in every machine that is going to run this automation, you can choose to have a Microsoft 365 connection instead. What this does is it creates a remote session to your Microsoft 365 account and it performs all the same actions that we have in Excel and Outlook, but without having that dependency of needing to have the actual application installed on your machine. Um, the only thing is that's come with a bit of setup beforehand. We actually have a pretty handy guide to go through all of the steps that you need. But basically, you have to create in Azure, you have to create an application, give it all the permissions that you need. For example, if you need read-write permissions to Outlook, to SharePoint, and from there, you can manage which users have access to this information. You can access the privileges that you give to the bot user and more, right? So all of this takes place actually remotely and in your Azure account to the cloud. Okay.
Cool.
Perfect. So that's just a quick overview, and I'll actually be doing a quick automation, step by step, and this automation will mostly touch on Excel and Outlook, and I also have a bit, and you would do it through Microsoft 365.
Thank you. And while you prepare for that, I'll just have a few comments from the chat. A. Sullivan says live sessions are always a challenge, and Natalie said that she was only a little bit nervous for today. And Natalie, I think you do a fantastic job, so keep going. And then Javier says that thank you, Anders. Your videos are very useful, and I will say thank you, Natalie. And Pratames says great. And then I have another question from Balram Singh, which I will wait a bit with later for later in the session. So back to you, Natalie.
Okay, perfect. And I'm glad my nerves are not showing. That's great to hear. So I'll give a quick description of what we want to accomplish with this automation, and then we'll actually build it. So I have this sample Excel sheet with some sample data, and we're gonna do a couple of simple manipulation to it. What we want to do in this case, we want to add total columns to this spreadsheet in which we are going to add the result or the product of the units times the unit cost to get the total amount. Then we're going to sort this information by the order ID. And then we are going to group this information by region. So all of the, for example, entries from the East accounts would be grouped in a separate Excel, all of the West in its own Excel, and so on. Okay. And after we have completed this, we're just going to send it to its appropriate receiver using the Outlook commands.
Cool.
I think that's pretty easy to follow, but it'll give you a good insight of how you would set up this type of automations. Okay, so back on the studio. When we started, I created this new script, which we call, say, sales forms formatting. Now, always when automating with Excel, the first step that you're going to want to do is use the Excel create application command. This basically will create the beginning of your scope, and it will allow you to create an OBAppInstance, which is, you'll see that name coming across around an OBAppInstance in our OpenBots Studio. It's basically a variable that we create to give a unique name or a unique handle to whatever we're interacting with. So in this case, with Excel. Why? Because maybe you are interacting with 2 or 3 Excels at the first time. This will let you differentiate with which one are you currently interacting with. Okay. And if you're new in a studio and maybe you don't know what each field needs, it's pretty helpful to hover over the field name. It will give you a good description of what the field requires from you, what this field is, the type of variable that it accepts. So in this case, the OBAppInstance type, and it'll even show you a sample of the input that you can use here. So I always recommend, if you're new with the commands, you don't know what it requires, check the tooltip. It usually gives you great information. Okay, so in this case, we do want to create the Excel instance variable. Now, in this case, I forgot to create it beforehand. As you can see, we have a variable manager here in which we can create the manager, the variable, and we can indicate the variable type. If you, like me, forgot to create it, you can always use the shortcut Control K, and it'll prompt you to the add variable screen. It will choose already the type of variable that is expected for this field, so you don't even have to choose or look for it. All you need to do is give it an actual name. So let's say this is my sales Excel instance. Oh, instance. Okay. Click OK. Now we have the instance variable created. In this case, I want to interact with the new workbook, so I'll choose the option to open an existing workbook. I can select the file that I want to interact with. I know it's sitting on my desktop and it's my sample Excel. Of course, as you can see, this is already formatted as a hard-coded value. One thing to keep in mind, OpenBots Studio, it was built in .NET framework. In all of our fields, we expect C# syntax. So the same way that you would format strings in C#, you would do it in our fields as well. Another thing to note, all of our fields, they have inline coding available. So for example, if you wanted to use a dot notation to modify this string, you will see all of the methods available in the IntelliSense on how you can configure this further, right?
That's really nice, Natalie.
Yeah, it comes very, very useful, especially if you're a little bit more tech savvy, allows you to do some great things.
And can I get that IntelliSense open by pressing Control Space or something like that? Or how do I open it if it doesn't show? Or if
It's
I
just
close it?
as you type. It's just
Okay.
as you type. Yep, it's just like you would expect in other IDEs. Is you type something that is familiar, like a variable, it would already start showing. Once you do, in this case, like the dot notation, it'll show the methods that are available. And if you actually keep doing it, it will just keep showing.
Thank you.
Yep.
And Prames says that is it drag and drop feature, and it certainly is. You drag from the left from the commands into the main. Natalie showed that a little bit earlier.
Yeah, maybe
So
I went
thanks.
fast, but yeah, you drag the command into the screen. You can also double click it. If you double click it, it will just add it below the currently highlighted command.
Cool.
Okay. So we have some default settings here. What do we want to do for read-only behavior? Usually you would only select request access if you're doing an attended automation. Usually you do want to throw an error if it's in read only. And whether you want to update fields in case you have some formulas in there that need to be updated. A password option in case the file is password protected. And we have the option of either hiding or showing the Excel as you're automating with it. Normally, I recommend to choose visible when you are debugging because it will show you the steps that are currently taking on as you are testing your automation. But to hide it once you put it into production or once you deploy it, um, because having the UI open, it can cause some unintentional issues that you don't really want to deal with. Um, so the best is to choose to invisible once we go into production. Okay. Um, so one thing to note, all of the commands that you will interact with in a studio, they will show this set of fields in there. It's just a default in all the commands. The private field, it will just hide any logs that this command may generate in case we're dealing with sensitive information, something that you don't want to uh, keep track of on the logs. You will choose it as private. You also have error handling within each command if you want to ignore or suppress an error if this runs into an issue, or do you want to report it? And the display and comment fields, that's just to show your own custom information for organization sakes and for making it just easier to read. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so we're gonna press OK. So we have the command there. So now we created that instance. We're keeping track of that Excel. In this case, the next step I want to do is read the data so I can actually interact with it. So for data, reading the data, we're going to go to the range commands in Excel, and I'm going to choose the get range command. So I can either drag it into the screen or I can double click the command. Um, it'll ask me for the Excel instance that I already created in the create application. That's why that's always the first step, because all of the subsequent commands will ask you for that Excel instance. We want to get the range. In this case, we are starting at 8.1, so we'll leave the default. We do want to keep track of the headers because that'll come handy later. In this case, we don't want to read the formulas. We just want the text that is displayed. And we do want to have the values. Okay. And in the output field, it's asking me for a data table variable. As you know, data tables and Excel, they come hand in hand, just as the way that the data is structured in an X and Y coordinates as a table. So we're going to create another variable. In this case, this is going to be my sales DT. It chooses the table as default and click OK. And OK. So now I created my application. I have read my Excel, and now I want to do the manipulation to the Excel. Now, there are different ways to go around it. We can either do the manipulation in the Excel itself, or we can manipulate the data table. Um, Usually, we try to do most of the data manipulation in the data table variable itself because that makes it faster to do, that gives us more methods available for us to use, and keeps it everything in the background in the variable level.
Can you
Um,
repeat that because that was great, Natalie? You want to use a data table manipulation instead of the Excel ones because of what?
Yeah, because we're keeping it in the variable level. We will be only modifying that data table variable. Variable interaction, it gives you more methods available. You have the full C# library available for you. We have the full data table command library for you. Um, Also, it will not need to interact and go back to the Excel each time we need to make a change. We'll keep it basically in the background, right? Once we do all the data table manipulation, that's when we usually go back to Excel to write the formatted table back. And of course, it depends on the cases, right? If we're going to do a pivot table, yes, we're going to do it through Excel. If we're going to do sheet manipulation, we do keep it in the Excel. But when it's data, we try to handle most of that at the data table level.
Cool, great
Okay.
one.
Okay. So now I'm going to switch to the data table commands. So it's just under the data manipulation commands, data table commands. And you'll see some of these even repeat. We have some filtering and sorting here. We also have some filtering and sorting in the Excel. But for this specific POC or tutorial, I'll do some of the manipulation in the data table level, and then we'll go back into the Excel. Okay. So what we want to do next is we want to add the total column. So we can start multiplying those values and adding it to the column. So I'm going to use the add data column command. I'll use the data table that already has all my Excel information, sales DT. I'll specify the column name that I'm going to give. Now for this tutorial, I'm hard coding all of my values, but usually for best practices, we want to keep all this information in an external source. For example, we can keep it as an asset on the server, or we can keep it as a value on a configuration file um, that we access at the beginning of the automation, right? This is something to keep in mind. Okay.
Hmm.
And for the output data table, I'm going to create a new data table, which is going to be my formatted sales DT. Okay. So now I've added that value and I want to update it across the column. Now to update it, again, different ways to do it. But in this case, I'm going to use for each. So I'm going to loop through the data table rows. I'm going to loop row by row and perform the operation and update it. There are other ways to do it. For example, you could choose to use a link queue or a link query instead, which will do it all in one go. Um, that's in the more tech savvy side of things. Um, One advantage of for each, for example, would be it gives you a little bit more control over what's going on in each row, especially if you have a lot of manipulation within each row. For example, if you have conditions or other calculations that you need to perform, we can keep within a for each. But if it's something simple that only requires one query, you can use a link query instead. Um, but usually we tend to go to the for each for some of these cases.
That's great.
Hmm.
So what you do here, you initialize an Excel instance, then you read it
Hmm.
into a data table, and now we're looping through them with a for each.
Hmm. We're looping to the for each so we can modify the rows with the updated values. So in the for each, I'm going to choose my formatted sales DT. And I'm going to convert it to a collection of rows as my input. Now, for example, if you didn't know you needed to convert it to rows, in the tooltip will actually show you in the sample side that if it's a dictionary, you need to do a dot to list. If it's a data table, you need to do a dot rows. So again, pretty handy to use those tooltips. And in the output collection, we're going to save the current row that we're currently looping on. So it'll be current sales row. Okay.
Mhm.
And usually I actually like to separate my code a little bit just to keep it clear. So first we have the Excel manipulation, and here we'll have the row manipulation. Okay. So now inside of each of this loop, we're going to update the row, and we actually have a command for it. We have update data row value. That's exactly what we're going to do. And in the data row, we're going to indicate the current sales row, which I have a type 1, but that shouldn't matter. We're going to indicate which column field I'm going to update. We can either do by index or by name. We usually want to choose the one that will stay more stable. So I like to go with the name usually, because even if it changes positions, you will still be able to track it. And then the updated cell value. Now, for the updated cell value, it will be the product of the units, the current unit times the current unit cost. There's different ways to go about doing that calculation. We can use, for example, a series of commands to do it. We get we could get the data row value of the unit column. We could get the data row value of the unit cost. We even have some math manipulation commands. We can use that to do the multiplication. Um, so there's ways to do it using separate commands. But for example, since we know we can use C#, we can use quick snippets of C# within this field. Instead, we can use a C# snippet to get that information in one go. And that's also one of the good things about a studio. If you have that technical knowledge, you can use it to your advantage, maybe to suppress some of the unnecessary steps into one line of code. But if that is not something you're familiar or comfortable with, you can also use the separate commands that we have available. We even have like a math command. Um, so it depends on the set of skills that you have coming in.
And just if you're telling this, so if I want to learn OpenBots, it will obviously be great to go through the OpenBots Academy to learn everything there and get a certification or two, which those ones are all free, which is great. And then you say maybe learn a little bit of C sharp.
Yeah, a little bit of C sharp, little snippets of C sharp code. They can make your life easier and your code more simple to follow. Maybe you don't even need to learn. Just Googling,
Yeah.
how do you do a multiplication using C sharp? You will see a lot of documentation out there um, that you can include in your code.
Yeah, and I even start using Chat GPT for that. That could probably just generate all my code. I use a lot of VB.NET, but it's almost the same as C sharp, and Chat GPT just generates those snippets of code just by 2 lines of text. So definitely, when you want to implement C sharp here, I can recommend using Chat GPT as a junior developer.
That's a great tip. Yeah, yeah. And if you come from a VB.NET background for a Java background, that conversion to C sharp is pretty smooth as well. So
Cool.
yep. So we're updating it. We're using just the a math.round. We are multiplying the values and we're getting the cells within the current row for the units and the unit cost. Um, And now for the output, we're just going to save the information in the same row because we're updating it. Our input is the sales row and the output is the updated sales row. Okay. And excuse me. Okay, one good tip about our commands as well. If you
Hmm.
try to add a command and you see this red line, it means that something didn't go as expected. It's not the data that it's not validating. So you can always hover over that red line, um, and it'll give you the error information. In this case, I'm calling my row current sales row, but I call it something differently because I have a typo here. I called it current sales row
Yeah.
instead. So of course it's not able to find it. So I'm just going to write the name with the typo just for sakes of time. So current sales row. Okay, and that let me go through. But it's pretty good. You can catch some of these errors before even having to run your automation, which is great in saving time as well.
And what if I wanted to rename that to the correct name down in the variables manager? Would that be an easy job?
Yes, actually, it's pretty easy. You will need to right click on the command. You have the rename option.
Hmm.
So you would just update the value here to current instead. And we'll update any occurrence of that variable too. So now if we
Great.
check back here, we have the correct value.
Great, Natalie.
Okay. And now that we have updated the row, I think the last thing we wanted to do with this table is to sort it. So we're going to use the sort data table command. We're going to put the formatted cells DT as input. We can choose by which column, index, or name we will sort it by. In this case, I'll use the order ID.
Yeah.
So order ID. Ascending order, this is a numeric value. I'm going to do it by numeric. And we'll save it in that same formatted cells DT. So now that's all the manipulation I wanted to do on the data table level. So now what's left is just putting it back into the Excel with the updated values. So now we're gonna go the other way around. First we did a get range. Now what we want to do is a set range or right range. Right range here. So the right range command and the same Excel instance that I'm keeping track of. We do want to start it in the 8.1 location. And as input for the data table, I'm going to use that formatted sales DT with the total column included now. And click OK. So now we're reading it back. Now we have the totals column. We have sorted it. The last thing I wanted to do was group it by the region. And now this portion, I decided to do it on the Excel level. And we can actually look for the command because I know it's called group. We have a command Excel group range by column name. This particular action is just easier to do it on the Excel level because it will read your Excel. It will group it by the column that you indicate, in this case the region, and it will create an individual Excel for each unique region name that it finds. So at the end, you'll have an Excel with the east values, with the central, and with the west values. And all of that is already done for you in this command.
And Natalie, I'll just interrupt you with
Mhm.
nice messages from Balram Singh. He says, really great so far. OpenBots might rock the RPA industry. I will surely take the certification to understand the tool better. And
Yes.
I also have a little question to that C# thing.
Mhm.
Balram Singh says, other than C#, could it be possible to utilize other script or languages in OpenBot? And before Natalie answers, thanks a lot for the great questions and comments. Just keep them coming. And I'll make sure that Natalie will answer them. I'll bring the questions to her. So, is that possible, Natalie, to use other scripts or languages in OpenBots?
So, yes and no. So for the C sharp, we have the option of using it inline in each field. For other languages, we do have commands to invoke other type of scripts, like we have support for Python, for PowerShell, and for C sharp using the commands. So you can save it as a dependency, as another script, and you can, for example, run your Python code there. But it's not native within the commands.
Cool. Thank you.
Yep. So, okay, so I'm going to group it by the region column, and I'm going to save it to a folder directory. Now, within each project that you create in a studio, you always have the project path variable. This comes very in handy when you need to save data to a temporary location. This will basically dynamically generate the path to the current folder running the automation. So I'm going to save it to my project path. And actually, I'm going to save it to a folder called output in my project path. Okay. I'm going to save it as an XLX, but you can also have interaction with CSV. Now, for this tutorial, we're focusing on Microsoft Office, but also keep in mind we have CSV commands to do some of this manipulation. We have workbook commands as well. Um, so you don't necessarily need an Excel application or an Excel Microsoft 365 instance to modify your scripts because there's other commands available to do this as a workbook. Okay. And in the output data table list, I'm going to say my data table sales list. Okay, click OK. So now I've grouped by it, and that is the last action that I wanted to do. So always the last step is to save your changes. Always remember to save your changes and then to close your Excel instance because you don't want to leave it hanging.
What does that mean, leave it hanging?
Well, this is like I mentioned at the beginning, it's like a scope. When you create the Excel instance, you're creating that variable and you're following this Excel with that OBAppInstance variable. Once you're done interacting with this, you always need to close it because else it will leave the Excel open, like you're still keeping track of it. So for example, if you were to run the automation and then run the automation again, maybe it won't let you to access the file because it will read it as still open, right?
Yeah.
So it's always a great idea, create your application and then close once you're done interacting with it. So we're going to save. We can either save the workbook, which will keep the changes in the same Excel sheet, or we can save the workbook as it will just save a copy to another location. And that's what I want to do in this case. So I'm choose the Excel instance. In the location, again, I'm going to use the project path with my output folder. And in the file name, let's say this is the formatted sales report. .xl xlsx. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And close it. For the close, it's just the Excel instance name. That's it. Okay. So now we're done with all the Excel interaction manipulation. Actually, one thing, I'm saving everything in my output folder, but I don't have an output folder, so it'll probably be a good idea to create that folder. We can use the create folder command at the beginning just to make sure that that folder is available for us. And we'll save it in the project path. Since this is a temp folder, usually we want to start with the clean folder. So we have the option of deleting it every time we create it, which I'll set to yes in this case. Okay, perfect. So we've done most or all of the Excel interaction. Now, before I go into the Outlook interaction, we can test this code. We can run it either in run mode or in debug mode. Debug mode will give you a couple more functionality, like the option of setting breakpoints, of seeing the current value of your automation, stepping into each line of code, modifying the value of your variables as you're running them as well. So when you're debugging, it is usually a good idea to run it as a debug instead. So I'll actually do that just for the sake of using that functionality.
Mhm.
I'm going to set a breakpoint right at the end, and I'm going to run it in debug mode.
And what is a breakpoint, Natalie?
A breakpoint is basically a stopping point. Whenever we hit a breakpoint, the automation that we're running will stop there, and we'll be able to see what the values of the variables are at that current stage.
That's cool. Thank you.
And we see as it's running, it's generating the logs for this run, which is available to you here just for easy access. It's also saved to a file, so you can reference later as well.
And we can customize that log, I assume, like we want.
Yeah, of course. As a setting on the studio, you can choose where you want to store all of these generated logs. Okay, so we see that it went through. It hit the breakpoint at my last line, and I just had a breakpoint to show you how it looks like. Whenever you hit a breakpoint, you'll see all the variables and arguments that you have up to that point, and you will have its values as well. So for example, for the formatted DT, if we double click on the value field, we'll see how that data table looks like at that point. And for example, if you wanted to change something on the go, you can click on these three lines of whichever field, and you can change its value here. You can create, for example, a new list. It just has to match the correct type, but you can change it on the go as well.
Oh, so you can change it at runtime and then continue, or
Mm-hmm.
that's
Yeah,
cool.
yeah, and that's excellent for debugging, for trying to figure out what the next step is, how is it a stage up to this point, or maybe you're running into errors and you don't know what is causing the error. This is a great way just to go step by step through your automation.
Cool.
And now I'm going to step into, there's nothing more here, so we'll just end the automation. It tells me it was successful. If there were any errors, it will be like bright red and you'll know it right away. And it'll tell you the error message associated with it. Okay, so now we've done the Excel portion and we're going to check the output of this code. We see that the output folder was created in our project path. And inside this output folder, we have the formatted sales report. And we also have the different Excel sheets for the West region, the East, and the Central. So now if I check my formatted sales report data, the total column was added, and we have all the values going up to the end. And if we check one of the region documents, like the East, we can see that this particular document is the information for the East. Okay,
Cool.
so that's what I wanted to do in this case. So
So
now,
mission accomplished almost.
yes, we're almost there. The last thing I wanted to do was just send it through Outlook. Now, in this case, I'll just send all the files to one Outlook receiver, but keep in mind we can use different, for example, conditioning, logic. if, for example, we only want to send the East spreadsheet to a specific person, the West one to another person, it will just be a matter of adding some conditions on it, some if statements, maybe a switch, and send it to the appropriate sources, right? This is a simplified version of a process, but there's much more that you could do.
And it's a process that you out there, the viewer, can build yourself easily. You can just repeat the steps Natalie do, pause or rewind the video, and then just replicate whatever Natalie did here.
Yeah, of course. So in this case, I'm going to send an email and I'm going to attach all of the files that I have as output. So the first steps I want to do is I actually want to get those files. And we have some file interaction commands. We have the get files command. This would look into a folder and it will return a list of all the files within that folder. So in this case, I'm going to look into my project path output folder. And I'm going to save that into a list of paths. Output folder path list. And it's selected as a list of strings. So once I have the files that I want, I'm going to use the Microsoft Outlook command to send my email. So send Outlook email command. Now for this, like I mentioned at the beginning, this attaches to your applications installed on your current machine. So the first field is actually indicating who is the sender account, what is the account that we're targeting. Usually within Outlook, you can have multiple users connected to your same Outlook application. So when that is the case, you do want to specify which specific email you're referencing in the command. That's what that field is. If you leave it as default, it will use the primary email in your Outlook account. In this
Cool.
case, I only have one, so I can leave it as blank. It'll go straight to my default. In my recipients, I'll just send it to myself. So Natalie Alvarado. .ai. You can also choose, if you check the tooltip, this supports both strings or a list of strings. So if you have multiple recipients, you can structure it as a list instead. Staying with the CC or BCC, you can choose a CC or a list of CC recipients, but this is an optional field, so you don't need to fill this value. For the subject, let's say something simple like bot completed, formatted report. And let's say we're going to put the date just to know when this bot completed. Again, we can use C#, so I'll use the $sign at the beginning and just concatenate a date time inside of this email subject. So I'm going to do it that date time, that now, that toString to get the current date. And I'm going to format it as the month, day, and year. Okay. So that's my subject. And in my email body, we can either choose plain text or we can format it as an HTML if you have any specific formatting in mind. In this case, I'll leave it as plain text and just keeping it simple. Attach Excel. And in the attachments file path, I already have my list that I received as output from the previous command. So I'll choose that output folder path list variable. And that should be it. So now I'm just going to run this automation again. And in this time, I'll just run it in run mode. Usually run mode goes a bit faster. Also, there is a setting on a studio that has the default delays within each command. You can go as low or as high as you want. Usually with data manipulation, we can even put it to 0 and it's just running a breeze.
Maybe it was a configuration step, Natalie, but could we just have Excel not opening while we run this automation?
Yes. I set it to visible just for
Yeah,
show,
of
but we can
course.
set it to hidden as well. So everything will run in the background.
Thank you. Cool.
Okay, so it's in the last of the Excel commands, and now it sent the Outlook and successful again. And actually that hidden is here. When you create the instance, you can choose here whether you want it to be visible or not.
Yeah, you covered that. I remember. Sorry.
No worries. So now we should be receiving an email and right on cue.
Mm-hmm.
We see that we have that email with all of the attached Excels on it. Right. So in this case, that completes this automation. That should give you like a good idea of how to structure your Excels, your Outlook. Of course, as you see, the list of commands is pretty extensive, so there's a lot of manipulation and things you can do with this same set of commands.
That's cool, Natalie. And you had absolutely no reason to be nervous. This was a really great presentation. Thank you.
Yeah.
We have a few questions, and if you have more questions, this is your chance for Natalie to answer them. I'll start with one from Loris Sampinelli. It might not be 100% related to this use case, but Loris asks, is it possible to connect with SAP?
Yes, we actually, if you go into Package Manager, under Gallery, we have a command package specifically for SAP automation. If I can find it here. For SAP automation. So it connects to your SAP instance and it has its own set of commands like click, set text, get table, and so on.
Cool, thank you. And Loris has another question. This execution time, is that normal debug or normal speed? Because I think it's very, very slow.
Yes, so usually in debugging in a studio, you go a bit slower um, just because you are debugging it and running it locally. You can always also set your options, your settings in your studio and your engine delay within each command to, for example, 0. The default is at 100 milliseconds between each command. You can set it to 0, especially if you're dealing with background processing because you don't really need that delay in there. Um, this will change it on a studio level. You also have the option of setting the delay on that's another name, set engine delay on a script level. So if you know that a specific script can have a different delay between commands, you can set it in there as well. For example, to 0. And also another thing to keep in mind, we decided to go for a for each loop in this case, but we could have easily used a link query instead, which would have been just one command. Um, so there's always ways to make your code faster as you refactor it, and also depending on the skill level set or the how tech savvy the developer is.
Thanks, Natalie, and to you, Loris. I hope this was answer enough for you. Please let us know in the chat, and I'll jump to the next question from Balram Singh. Thank you, Balram Singh, for the questions. Do we have the option to utilize the Excel command in OpenBots without having the Excel installed in our system?
Yes, we have different options. We either have the Excel 365 commands, which I'll go a bit over a script that I already have. So with the Microsoft Excel 365, you're basically connecting to it on a remote level through the Azure APIs. We also have the workbook commands. In this case, it doesn't need to have an Excel installed. It works on the workbook level. And we also have the CSV commands to do some manipulation.
Cool. Thank you, Natalie. And Loris said that that was like in UiPath links. Link is better every time in
Yeah.
time-consuming point of view than for each. And yeah,
Yes,
definitely.
yes.
And I
Yeah,
have,
I agree there.
yeah, before you continue, Natalie, we actually had one question from previous. It's from Balram Singh. Thanks for the great questions, Balram. He says, "Hi, Anders. Seems the OpenBots tool looks great. Could be better if you could cover the deployment details, whether it supports unattended automation and other form of deployment." Maybe you should not cover it fully now, but you can just briefly answer that.
Yes, so this is just one piece in the puzzle of what we have available. This is just the IDE to develop the automations, but we have two other pieces to the core products. We have the assistant. So the assistant is basically the runtime operator. The assistant can run your automations either as attended or unattended automations. And it all works connected to the server. So the server is where is how you can manage, you can create your schedules, you can store data like assets and credentials, you can create your queues and monitor your queue items, your logs to the automation. So yeah, you can run your projects fully unattended, fully autonomous, and monitor them from the server. I think we actually have a session coming up with another of my peers, which
Hmm.
will cover the server portion. But on a high level, yes, that's we do have all of that functionality available.
Cool, Natalie. I will find a link for that session, Balram Singh, and post it in the chat in 1 minute, and I will uh, transfer the microphone back to you, Natalie.
Yeah, no, and this is just the last piece that I wanted to cover. So here we've used all the application level commands, but we also have the option of Excel 365. Um, For the Excel 365 commands, the steps to setting it is a bit similar, but some differences as well. In this case, what we want to do is we want to create a Microsoft 365 session before using any of the Excel or Outlook or SharePoint commands. This command will ask you for your client ID and your tenant ID, which you would set up on your Azure portal. We have a guide available. And actually, I should have it open somewhere in here. When you're setting it up in Azure, you can set your permissions depending on what the bot or what you want the bot to have access to. For example, if it will be only be used to send emails, you can just have the email sent permissions available and so on. You can also restrict the users that have access to this Microsoft 365 automation. Extra layers of security there. Now, once you create that,
Now the microphone went bad again, Natalie, just randomly.
oh,
Can we take the fix from? Did you just reconnect? And while Natalie, can you try that fix again?
yes, let me try that.
And while Natalie talking out, Natalie will answer all of the great questions that are incoming right now. Thanks a lot for those, and it's your time to ask OpenBots and Natalie about anything here. And we will just share the desktop, Natalie's desktop again.
Okay, does it sound any better?
We cannot see your desktop yet.
Okay, let me see. Let me share. Here. Okay.
Yeah, here you come. You sound great again.
Oh, great. At least we know how to fix it.
Yeah.
Okay. So once we have the 365 session, then we can use all of the Outlook, Excel, or SharePoint commands available. In this case, I have a quick automation that kind of works in conjunction with this script that we did before, but it goes the other way around. What it does is it gets that email that we sent, and it downloads that file to a folder. So instead of sending it, we're receiving it and we're getting those emails. So we're using the Microsoft 365 instance as input. We're checking the folder where it was sent. And we are saving the attachments that are associated to that email to a project path folder called Output 365. And this will generate a list of messages um, that follow this criteria. We can also choose to filter it further. For example, if we want to get emails that are only sent by a specific email or that have a keyword in the body or in the subject, we can use further filtering as well. Okay,
Thank
so
you.
we're getting the emails. We're saving it in a 365 folder. Then we're compressing it and just wrapping it up into a zip folder. And now we are uploading it to SharePoint. So I have a SharePoint site here, which is called testnet, and I have my output demo folder. So I'll just save those that zip folder into this location. Again, I'm using my Microsoft 365 instance, the SharePoint name, that in this case is testnet. Keep in mind that in order to find your SharePoint site name, you need to have this site as favored in your list. That's the only way that it will be able to find it linked to your account. In this case, I already have it in my favorites. And I'm using the search query to find the folder, which in this case is output demo, and save it in the drive item list. Everything within Microsoft 365 and SharePoint, we treat it as a drive item. And then I'm just uploading it. I'm uploading again to my testnet, to that drive item that I got before, and I'm indicating the folder that I'm uploading, which is that compressed folder. Okay, so now if I run this automation, just run it from here. Okay, successful again. And now if I go back to my SharePoint, just refresh, output demo folder, I can see that that zip folder was uploaded just a few seconds ago with all of the files that were included in that email.
Great, Natalie.
So
It
that's
was
just
that
going
easy.
the other way. Yeah, it was that easy, just 8 commands. And in this case, we didn't even need to have anything installed. We just made that connection to Microsoft remotely with that session.
Great. We have a few more questions.
Mhm.
Yusuf, hello Yusuf, how are you? Yusuf asks, is it paid software?
So the Studio is completely free and available on our OpenBots site. The only thing you do need to have is an account with us. Um, Once you have an account, you can go to your dashboard, go to a studio, and you can download it for free. You can download as many studios as you want. The only piece where we monetize is on the server, which would be to actually deploy and manage your automations. And we have the cloud flavor and the on-premise flavor. But to start developing and do all the steps that I did here and have your completed automation in a studio, you can start doing that with your free account.
Thank you, Natalie, and thank you, Yusuf. I hope that was answer enough, Yusuf. Please let us know in the chat if you have further need for elaboration. Then we have one from Ganesh. Hello, Ganesh. How are you? Ganesh says, "Did we automate? Can we automate Citrix applications and mainframe applications with OpenBots?"
Yes. So again, in the package manager, we have a command package, which is the terminal commands. With those, you can make a connection to your mainframe. And for Citrix application, we have the remote command. So it depends on how much access you have to your Citrix. If, for example, you can install a connector on your Citrix, we can make that connection and the commands can work remotely on that session. We have some cases where that's not an option. You cannot install connectors in your Citrix. In that case, we have the surface automation commands, which perform actions based on images and keystrokes only.
Cool. Great answer. Thank you. And that was it for the questions.
Perfect. I think we're right on cue too.
No, Natalie, that was really awesome to see how easy it was to automate Microsoft 365 with and legacy Office with OpenBots. Um, Willie V, hello Willie, um, asks, I'm a Power Automate desktop user. Why should I switch to OpenBots? What are the strong points of OpenBots?
I think the main point is because it is a full-fledged automation suite. We have everything you need to have a strong RPA center of excellence, right? We have the studio to development, we have the server to monitor them, to orchestrate them, to manage them, to save data, centralize. We have the business center, which is used for human in the loop automations. When you need that human input. For specific cases. We have what we call sites and forms or business apps in which you can create forms and gather data from users, and then, of course, automate that data and use it as input for your automations. We have documents, which I think you went over last week, which is our intelligent document processing tool. In case you have invoices or documents that need a specific processing. Um, Basically, you have everything you need to start your automation journey. Or if you, like in your case, if you're already with a vendor, we have I think we have more capability and functionality that you can use. And the difference between us and other vendors too is that licensing model. Maybe not specific for Power Automate, but for other vendors out there. Um, for example, the studio itself, we don't limit the amount of studios that you can install, that you can download. We don't have a specific licenses for the assistant either or the agent. You can have as many bots as you want, as many development instances as you want. We just have a different structure on how we view things. We want to make it easy for you to start, and also to scale as you go up and as you're more comfortable deploying these bots.
Great, Natalie. I'll say the best thing about OpenBots to me is the ability to run as many parallel unattended robots that I wanted. So definitely the pricing. Not as, of course, the product is easy to use and all that, but that will definitely be um, one of my favorite features about OpenBots.
Yeah. Since there's no licensing attached, sometimes we have a process that the best way to have it is, let's say, 5 different bots automating it. And that's not something that we can do with other vendors, because we have to think, oh, this license goes to this bot, this one goes to this one. We need to change it and tweak it. We cannot go with the ideal structure or architecture for some of the automations, and that is not a limitation in OpenBots. If the best way to structure it is in 10 individual bots that run in parallel, you can do so, and it would make no difference because there's no licensing attached to each bot.
Great. And Willy says, thank you, Natalie. I will give it a try.
Yeah, I'm glad.
Great. Natalie, we are about to come to an end with this great session with you. You didn't make one single mistake, so there was definitely not anything to be nervous about. Thanks for showing OpenBots to us and showing us how easy it was to automate Microsoft.
Perfect. No, I'm glad I was able to help. And check out our academy, check out our forums, and download a studio, and you can follow this tutorial to start as well.
That's great. And to you viewers out there, thanks a lot for all the great questions. Thanks for watching. Thanks for trying OpenBots and liking this video if you found it useful. Natalie, see you.
See you. Thanks, everyone.